Hello. Hi, everyone. Hi, Butch.
Howdy.
How are you?
I'm doing great.
Awesome. Let's wait for a few more seconds, just the usual, to wait for people to join, and I think we can kickstart for the next 1 hour of whole Playwright awesomeness.
We're going to do our best.
And the demo gods hope to be with you and us.
Thank you.
Cool. I think we can get started. We have a good number of participants joining in. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today from different parts of the world. We have Butch Mayhew, who's the head of quality and reliability at TILD, who loves finding more efficient ways to complete tasks. And I think we can ask more questions of what that means. And he has many different stories to share with us. And most importantly, he's also a Playwright ambassador. And today he's gonna share with us on his top 6 Playwright features, how to build a rock solid, framework around it, especially around the JavaScript ecosystem. With that, no further ado, let's get into all the Playwright stuff. Butch, over to you.
All right, let's see if this works. Assuming y'all can see my screen. So we're going to get this started. If you are around the same age as me and know a little about the US culture, the most famous, or the first, it's not the most famous, but the first boy band that I'm aware of, New Kids on the Block, inspired some of this talk. But I'm going to talk about Playwright and it being, the new tool on the block. And just a quick intro on who I am. So howdy, I'm Butch Mayhew. If you want to connect with me, or if you scan this, or you can see the link down below, you can connect with me through Link. It's a little app, kind of like LinkedIn, but different. But I've been with TILD for around 2 years. I've been in a testing journey about 10 years overall. And, I'm a big fan of Playwright, and hopefully I'll tell you why, tell you a little more about my journey and so forth. But to get started, everyone and their mother, everyone's like, hey, we've got to automate all the things. And I am all about automating almost all the things. I'm actually about automating all the right things, but not just the right things at the right levels. And, I kind of start off my talk here because Playwright is a tool that can do all sorts of different things. It can be used just as a library to make HTTP requests, or a lot like Selenium to just go and be a web browser. But it also has a test runner and stuff built around it. And in the context of this talk, so this is not all the context, but the context of this talk, I'm going to talk about the levels I use Playwright for, and where I use to automate certain things. But not just the right things, but at the right levels. So specifically, the areas I'm going to talk about are API regression tests. So this is like HTTP request to database, so HTTP to DB, and then UI regression tests. So this is kind of the DOM layer to the database. And I'm a big fan of visualizing things. And this is an example. I think it was Mark and Richard from Ministry of Test. They kind of like helped me see like, hey, you can think about systems in different ways. And this is an example of a visual task analysis of specifically a login page. And I know this might be a little small to read, but ideally you've got your UI up here. You've got maybe a JavaScript layer, maybe you've got an API layer, you've got a service layer, and you've got a database layer. And each of these different sections, different actions happen, different calls get made within the application. But typically, like when we're automating, right, we are hitting the UI layer, or maybe we're hitting the API layer, right? So these two sections, but there's a lot of like application code that happens in the middle of all this. So I say that just to say, like, we're going to focus on UI and API, but in the end, we're testing all these different types of interactions. So automating all the right things at the right levels. And I'm a big fan of exploratory testing or just, testing in general, like you can't automate away exploratory testing, right? You need that feedback loop. You need someone that can think, that can go in and exercise the system and say, hey, is this good or is it bad? But you can automate away boring checks or test cases, right? So you're not having to do the same, type work every single time. We still need the exploratory factor, but we can automate away a lot of those checks. And I'm a big fan of using automation in testing. So this frees me up to apply critical thinking as the system changes. So typically the way I would use this is, we have our automation that's going to help us find regressions, but a new ticket comes that a developer just delivered or wants to release. It's deployed to an environment. First thing I'm going to do is not go figure out where do we need to add coverage. First thing I'm going to do is go use the feature. I'm going to go be a human being, use the feature like our customers would. And then from that learning, figure out, all right, what do we need to do to know, what kind of automation checks can I build to know if something changed that we didn't expect to change, right? And start making decisions that way. All right, so quick agenda. I'm going to go over what is Playwright, just an overview of that. I'm going to go over 𝐁. This is the company I work for, our CI/CD pipeline, and how we leverage, Playwright in our GitHub Actions. I'm going to talk about my 6 top features. It might actually be 7 or 8. I can't remember, but there's going to be some fun stuff there. And we're going to walk through some code on what a UI spec looks like and what an API automated check would look like. All right, so let's get into it. So what is Playwright? My guess is if you're here, you probably have heard of this. It's a new tool on the block. It's an open source tool that's built by Microsoft. I say built by, it's really built on top of. It's actually a fork of like Puppeteer, which is a Google tool, but it's a fork of that. And they've basically, continued to build on top of it. But it's reliable end-to-end UI and API testing for modern web apps. I would argue, like, just thinking about the way Playwright has been advertised, it's been advertised a lot like Cypress, in that, hey, this is a tool developers can use. So when I found it, I started playing with it. I'm like, this is a tool testers need to know about too, because it's really powerful and it can do a lot of things. It can do, a lot of the things that we do in our day-to-day work, as far as adding regression coverage and whatnot. But it does do like component level testing and, some unit level-ish type testing on the UI as well. But I'm not going to cover that in this talk. Just a couple interesting things about Playwright. It's got 50,000 stars on GitHub. I'm not sure like how the star system works. I know it's popular, but I don't know. This is just a stat. It doesn't really mean anything, but it is somewhat popular in the world of GitHub stars. They have a monthly-ish release cycle. So every month you get a new version of Playwright with more up-to-date browsers. So all the browsers are packaged with Playwright. So when you do a Playwright install, basically a specific fixed version of the browser gets installed with that version of Playwright. And that gets released on a monthly basis. Some, they have like patch releases and stuff like that. So you don't have to worry about browser dependency or, kind of dealing with web drivers and, stitching everything together. Like I've done that. It's doable. There's problems that need to be solved. And, but Playwright kind of handles that all within the install steps that they give you. They support TypeScript, JavaScript, Python, .NET, Java. There's also a Ruby and Go, kind of like the community's kind of pushing as far as bindings. So this is very similar in a lot of ways to Selenium, where they're trying to make Playwright a tool that any language can interact with and use. I will say for specifically for I'll talk about that in the next one, but I would argue Playwright is closer to Selenium WebDriver than it is Cypress. So if you've used Cypress, if you've heard of that, when you run a Cypress test, like the first thing you do is it kind of pulls up this big browser that kind of has your tests built in, that has like the Chrome browser with kind of all the dev tools built in. And that's the way you run Cypress. You can run it like unheaded, but it's basically instrumenting all that stuff in the background. But some of the drawbacks of Cypress is if you want to interact with an iframe, or if you want to interact with like another tab, there are troubles doing that. I think it can be done, but there's kind of some like really, it's not out of the box. You have to find some workarounds and stuff to get a lot of that stuff to work. Whereas with Selenium and with Playwright, right, you can go create a new tab or create a new browser context pretty easily, all with one or two lines of code. So I also think like the Playwright, they use Chrome DevTools protocol to drive like at least Chrome, and then similar type APIs to drive some of the other browsers. So it's kind of closer to Cypress in that regard, but it's not reliant on Chrome to be a Chromium version to kind of be like all the tests to be living in that. It's kind of like outside in, a lot like Selenium, which I prefer. And it's an out of process automation driver. So that's kind of like what I said. So rather than it being in page in the scope of a JavaScript execution, it's actually running on the outside. And specifically, I'm going to cover the TypeScript JavaScript implementation. That's what I'm most familiar with. And that's just it uses Node to kind of execute all the tests and the test runs. So this is probably the biggest feature in my mind. I know like Playwright is pretty popular with like the Python language as well. I think I've seen some Java as well. But with currently there's a built-in test runner, but it's only available for the TypeScript and JavaScript implementation. And if you've ever built a Selenium framework from scratch, like you've got to basically take all these pieces, all these different libraries, and kind of glue them together, right? You've got to pick your test runner, your test reporter, your web driver, like a Selenium or something like that, right? And with Playwright, they've kind of taken that concept similar to kind of what Cypress did and said, hey, let's kind of bundle all this together and be prescriptive in some ways about here's how you're going to write your test. Here's the test runner you're going to use. But what's really nice is like Playwright they say, hey, you can use this test runner and kind of follow, this guide, or you can also just use Playwright as a individual library, a lot like you can Selenium. So those are just some pros that I found, but we're going to talk about the test runner. That's one of my favorite things. But before we go there, let's talk a little bit about our CI/CD pipeline at 𝐷. So to start off, we at 𝐷, and I'm assuming where you work, you probably have like some kind of like code names for certain things. For us, I guess in the beginning of 𝐷's inception, it was decided that we are going to have all of our projects and services, they're all going to be named after birds. So hence you have on the left, peacock, it's a really crazy looking peacock, and on the right, a goofy looking turkey. These are what we've named our API frameworks. The reason for that is we started with peacock because peacocks are pretty and they actually eat bugs. You can Google that. So we're like, hey, peacock is a great idea for our UI automation framework. And then we started to implement some API checks, and we're like, hey, APIs, you're doing a lot of checking, and we're like, well, turkeys are just fat, ugly peacocks. Nobody needs to see them, and they eat bugs too. And so here we are, turkey and peacock. These are automation frameworks, and I'm just going to quickly run through kind of the development life cycle of how we do things and where we add our checks in with these different repos. So our API service, which we are a payments company, so we are API first. You can think of us as like a third party for other people, other companies. So you might work with a software where you need to take payments. we would be that third party that would accept those payments and, tell you if it passed or not, and basically have the rails all the way down to the credit card processors. So, a big portion of what we do is through our API calls, making payments and doing refunds and whatnot. So, we spend a lot of time on our API automation, and our workflow would start here. We've got master, which goes to production. We have our development environment. So this is like our staging environment where we do a lot of our integration testing, where we run nightly regression checks. And we actually recently added the ability to, anytime new code gets deployed here, we will also run our turkey automation to give us feedback. And then before that, so kind of going up the chain of like, how do we get code to production? The first thing a dev is going to do is they're going to create, branch off of develop. They're going to create a feature branch. They're going to do some testing on their local. They're going to hopefully run their unit tests. They should be doing that. And then once they create a pull request, we've got some automation that goes through and we'll create, we use a service called 𝐕𝐢𝐝. It's a environment. It's basically a preview environment variable. So it takes our Docker Compose file, it spins up like our API, a very small seeded database, and some other stuff. We run some happy path automation checks against that. And then we actually give feedback back to the pull request to say, hey, things passed or they didn't pass, with a thumbs up or a thumbs down on a comment. And then once it gets merged in, it's basically on the way to production. We don't have any kind of release train. It's just kind of, as soon as something's ready, we get it merged, we get it deployed. And we use automation, to really tell us, hey, when have things changed? Did things get broken, right? Thinking, having that regression test hat on, these are our test cases that we're not having to, manually go execute every single release, because sometimes we release 6 times a week, and that would not be fun. So this is kind of our API side. For our UI, we have it, it's called Hawkeye, because the hawk eye, it's pretty, but there's also like Marvel shows about it as well. But it's really because there's a hawk in it. But very similar process. We don't use a fuzzy for this. We use AWS Amplify. So we have a UI that actually talks to our staging database, but it's a Angular UI. We run our automated checks out here. And then when everything gets merged into develop, we run our automation checks again. So what this does is this gives us that quick feedback that we need to be able to know it's change detection, right? Hey, we've built this test. Has anything changed? When things do change, we can go further, explore it, investigate it. Was it on purpose? Was it not on purpose? If it's on purpose, maybe we go update our checks. If it's not on purpose, we go have a conversation with the dev and we start that conversation. So, you might be asking, like, where does exploratory testing happens? I told you, I love exploratory testing. What happens here, before we even start development, and here, because, we encourage our devs to test things, and sometimes we pair up with them before they create a pull request. It also happens here in our preview environment. It happens on our peer review process. We have, us as testers, we have access to the pull request, so we can go see what code's changed and go, have a conversation with the developer before things get merged in. It also happens out here in our staging environment. It also happens on our final peer review. If we see something wonky with our regression tests and staging, maybe once 2 branches get merged together, we have a say before that goes to production. And we also test in production, right? When there's questions and things we're not sure about things, right? We're going to go check production as well. So I emphasize that to say that we're talking about automation tooling today, but the value of automation is really to give us that feedback we need so we can release high quality software, right? And a part of, you can't do that with just tools. You've got to do some sort of testing as well, a part of the process, and have that human feedback loop. All right, so bird watching, this is what we call the role in which we monitor our automation runs. So those nightly runs that happen, the pull request runs that happen, Our team basically, we have someone who is assigned to bird watching. And what that means is we watch our Slack channel. So as, code comes in, code gets deployed, we run our automation. If there's any failures in our automation, they get posted to Slack. And that's kind of like our real-time place to go look and to troubleshoot issues. And since it's built into Slack, it's got cool things like emojis. So we will quickly, if we see something that's failing, we'll hop in there. We'll say, hey, put a pair of eyes on it. Say, hey, we're looking at this, or hey, we're fixing this, or maybe it's an environment issue. Maybe it's a bug. Maybe there's some tests that need to be fixed or updated. We've got a different like color codes for stuff like this, but it's been really nice as a communication tool. And what's really nice is we actually have our developers that are like watching this channel as well. So like as a bunch of red happens and they see like, oh, this was on my pull request, they may actually go in and use the tooling we built, to go help them get feedback on, hey, what's changed, etc. So you can see here, this is our API automation. So we ran around 12,000 checks in about 11 minutes, and we had one failure. So in this scenario, I investigated it. I actually found that this was a flaky test. I made a push for it yesterday, and it's not going to be flaky anymore, which is great. It's one of those like we made a poor choice when we wrote the test. This was one of like 8 in a single test file, and we basically made the mistake where if you ran them all, like if you ran all of them, everything would be fine. But for this one, if you ran it by itself, it would fail. And it was because there was something happening in another test with our test data that actually changed something. And, I went and debugged it, found it with our tooling, and, it's not going to be flaky anymore, which is great. So this is an example of a very simple GitHub Actions file. So this is what we use for our CI/CD. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because there's more fun things to talk about. So real quick, I'm going to look at these questions. I'm going to see if there's anything. Are there any questions that we need to like pause and answer before we get moving too forward?
I think it's good, Butch. We can go ahead and take the questions during end of the session.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
Cool.
All right. So this is going to be a section where we're going to demo some things. So hopefully you get to see like some of my flow, but also just a repo in action. Again, all the examples I'm looking at can be found at this URL. So if you go pull that down, I'm not saying go pull it down right now, unless you want to. You can do it with me, or you can do it after the session. So hopefully that is helpful. So this is going to be a whole bunch together, but for the first set of features, I feel like reporters, just having videos, having the retries kind of baked in, and having parallelization baked into the framework. And this is specifically like the test runner with TypeScript. All this stuff is kind of baked in. So when back in 3 years ago, when I was working in Selenium primarily, we had a Ruby implementation where we had actually built a ton of automation that was really valuable. It's still running today, which I feel good about that. But we built all this stuff in Ruby, and when we wanted to figure out how do we retry test failures, like if we wanted to do that, how do we do it? We had to go get this tool, implement that into our framework. If we wanted to create like a really cool report, we had to go get this other tool, maybe an alert report, bring that in. Maybe we actually built some of our like custom type reports as well. When we wanted to implement like, hey, how can we get a screenshot or video recording when a failure happens? Like we had to like struggle pretty hard to figure out like, how do you do this in Ruby? And what other libraries need to be installed on the OS for this to work, and for it to run in GitHub or GitHub Actions and give us that feedback. And then like one of the hardest problems was like the parallelization problem. Like, how do we run more than one at once, right? And I know there's like different tools that allow you to do that. But like, if I wanted to do that on my local machine, like it was very difficult, right? I didn't have a way to do that out of the box. I had to go find solutions. And, after probably 2 or 3 years of like solving all these problems within Ruby, I basically had a good pattern that I could go take to another project and another project and another project, and things were good. But when I joined a new company and they're like, we know Ruby, but like no one uses Ruby here. That's really where I started investigating and saying, hey, we're a node project. Let me figure out like what node tools there are. And when I found all this stuff kind of came out of the box with Playwright and a test runner, I was like, whoa, that's really cool. Let's check that out. So let's check that out as a group today. I'm actually going to start with running. We're going to just look at a report that's already been run. So this is this is the repo that I called out. A part of this repo, I'm actually publishing the test report that gets generated after a test run to this link over here. So this is like a publicly viewable thing. And this report is actually from the last test run that actually came from this pull request. So if you go to pull requests, you can see 2 out there. Fixing a test for a demo, that was me 1 hour ago. That's actually what we're looking at. And this automation run that ran, where you see a bunch of things pass, you can see like some of the parallelization stuff happening over here. I can actually see this thing failed. And this is the report for all those tests. And what I want to show off here is specifically on the failed example, just what you get kind of out of the box with the Playwright runner. So first off, you can see I actually did a retry. So I ran it once, it failed. I retried it, it also failed. But scrolling through here, you can see this is the error. We're going to come back to this. You can see all the different test steps, and you can see like the specific line of code that it actually failed on. So line 28, it was waiting for this locator to click it. And the specific error is it's waiting for a locator called text login. And there's some really helpful, useful information up here, which we're going to come back to. So don't go too far. I'm also going to scroll down here and see, this is something I enabled in the config. So I didn't have to build anything. I just had to go to my Playwright config and say, specifically on this file, I had to come in here and say, hey, for my screenshots, I want to take a screenshot on failure. I also want to retain the video on failure. And for tracing, so this is basically capturing all the different network traffic that happens. I have that on for all my transactions. So but you can also set that up to only failure as well if you feel like there's a lot of space that you have. So I'm going to just, so you see the screenshot here. You see a video. I'm going to go ahead and click this and see what happens. So I know this is kind of hard to see, but basically it's trying to click login. It can't. There's a username and password here. We can actually make this big. Login is basically where it failed. And one other thing that's helpful to see is the trace file. So if you ever do have a failure and it's due to like a weird network request or something like that, this trace viewer will basically gives you a lot of insight. This is very much Cypress-like, and this is somewhat this is kind of like a new view on the trace viewer that they've created as of, I think, like last month, where they got this updated. So I can actually come down here and see like this first API context post. I can go pull this up. I can look at the network tab, and I can see the first thing I'm doing in this test is making a post to a API endpoint with this body. So there's like a username and password, and I get a response body back. So like if I go to my code over here, that is actually going to be this section right here. So I've got a test that is wanting to do a login, and the specific thing is we want to successfully log in. And before I do anything, I actually go and create a user. And this is like this is like JavaScript type stuff, but if you're used to page objects, you can think of it as this is me calling a method or a function that exists on another page that basically goes and makes an API post request with a body form that I pass in. And I think for this example, for create user, yeah, I think the body form is actually what I set up here. So I'm creating this user called test with all this information. So this is all fake data, so nothing to worry about. I make a post there, and then in my request, I know that I've got this username of a user that I've created, because in this, I'm actually returning the username that gets generated up here, or that I actually set up here. So now I have this username that I can then go log into a test with. So that's what's happening. But where the failure is happening is actually down here. So it was line 28. We said, hey, await page locator text equals login click. And it actually, said there was an issue, right? So let's go back to our issue here, and let's go look at the error. So this error is locator.click, error strict, mode violation, locator text equals login. It resolved to 3 elements. So one thing like really nice that I like about Playwright is if it resolves to something and it matches like 2 or 3 things, it will tell you. And it will even tell you, hey, if you want to use this link, you should use get by role and pass this in. If you want to use this header, I can see it's a H2 tag, you should use this locator. If you want to use the submit button, which is the login button, you should use the get by test ID login button. So like quickly from here, I can see, what exists, what needs to happen. And if I wanted to like drive down any deeper, this traces will let me come over here and actually use a locator. So I can come over here, pick a locator, and it will, tell me, hey, get by test ID login button. So a lot of really cool stuff kind of built into Playwright out of the box that helps me, write my tests, maintain my tests faster and better. This is an example of some of the reporting. We're going to go fix that test, so hang tight. But before we do that, we're going to talk about the VS Code extension. This is another one of my favorite, just my favorite tools is the Playwright VS Code extension. It is something that you basically install as an extension. I think it is called Microsoft or Playwright Test for VS Code. What this does is it will add a testing beaker glass over here. It will show you all the tests that are written, allow you to run them, debug them, or even just visit them with this button. And you can run them all from here or run different subsets from here. What's really nice is like you also have a lot of the debugging capabilities in here as well. So we're actually going to go find the test that the login user test, and we're going to see if we can debug it using the VS Code tools. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show the browser. So it's going to pull up a browser. If you have the unclicked, it will run in like non-headed mode. And let's see if we can run this test. And I'm expecting it to fail, right? I'm expecting it to say, hey, we can't find that login button. And let's go see where it failed. So error, locator click. So it gives you a couple different options here. This is actually a working version, this page locator button has, but rather than us like jumping in there, let's just go take a look at, I'm going to debug on this page, and we're going to right click, debug the test, and it should hopefully pause on this breakpoint. So it's going to pull up everything. It is paused, so you can see like I've got some variables that are showing up here. I've got a little debug runner up here. and you can see that this test is currently paused. So it is currently like, it's given me some really interesting feedback, even through this debug view, where it's saying, hey, I'm finding this that has the text of login, this element that has the text of login, and this element that has the text of login. And it's basically saying, hey, you need to be more specific. You need to be more verbose with your locators. So we're not, locating on multiple. I will say, like, this page.locator is a lot like defining like an element, but like in Selenium, where you have to kind of say like an element that is a link that has this attribute. Playwright, the locator itself, you can kind of do that type of verbosity, but you can also just type, give me something that has text with login, or give me in this example, a locator that is a button that has text login. So that kind of like narrows down my scope. I'm actually going to use this get by test ID. So, which it's funny here, this is actually giving me a different type of login. So this is a button has text with login, but I'm going to inspect this. And we're going to go see, I believe there's a data-QA. So this data-QA is like a data test ID that exists with login button. So we're actually going to use that. And there is a method here, get by test ID, which this is something you kind of have to set up in the config, like assuming you have data test IDs that are all consistent. Hopefully there are. You can go set that up. So we're just going to type in await page.get by test ID. You can see there's some nice autocomplete. I know for all the Java folks out there, like when I worked on Java, like having the autocomplete was very helpful for me. I did not get that in Ruby, which made me sad, but I think it probably made me better in the long run. So I'm going to get by test ID login button, and then I'm actually going to use a click method on this because we want to click it. So I'm going to go ahead and take these out because we don't need them anymore. I'm actually going to delete them because, clean code is the way. I'm going to stop the debug, and I'm just going to rerun this test, and I'm going to make sure it passes. So this is typically, okay. I know about this. This is like a Playwright bug or something. Like when you're debugging a test, the second time it thinks it's closed, but it really hadn't. But there should be a bug report out there. So we've got logged in. It looks like the test completed. I don't have my browser set up to automatically close after this. That's why it didn't go away. But that was really nice. Everything worked. So one thing that, there's a lot of different things you can do. You can see down here that we actually take a screenshot and do a comparison. So I basically use this to do a visual test comparison. So this is like the simplest version of visual comparison. Like this is not Applitools level. This is like, if there's a pixel or two off, like it's going to fail and not be awesome. But it is something that's helpful if you have like a consistent UI. And so for example, that screenshot gets saved in here. And you can see that I've got one for Darwin. So this is my Mac version. I also have to maintain a Linux login because that's where my tests run in the cloud. So, and the way the browsers render across different machines, that's something you have to account for. So adds a little bit of complexity, but just knowing that you can do some visual comparisons on within Playwright itself, it's pretty cool. But just know that it's not mind-blowing. It's not like all the features or anything like that. One other thing to just kind of note out in this test is if I were to go to, let's just go to this web page in a different browser, you will notice that there are some Google ads that pop up. So specifically, when I was using this site the first time, or when I was automating on it, there weren't any Google ads. I continued to automate it on it. There was some crazy Google ads, some that even blocked me from logging in because there was a Google ad that would pop up over this login button that caused me a lot of grief. But what's pretty cool with Playwright is because it's used in the Chrome DevTools protocol, a lot of features are built in to be able to manipulate network traffic. So for this example, and for our test, I actually have a route that's built into Playwright that will take all the requests. So all the requests are passing through this route. And I basically say, if the request starts with Google Ads DoubleClick.net, if it is true, abort it. If it's false, continue the request. So like if we go back and look at our example of our test run, and I go look at my trace, you're actually going to see a whole lot of these route continues. These are all, you can see like the request URLs down here. All these request URLs are getting routed through that code. And then when it hits the Google ad, I think it's going to be this one. So maybe it's that one, or maybe another one underneath here. It's basically saying, hey, abort that request. We don't want to see the Google ads. So we never see the Google ads in our test, all because of this block of code. And again, you can route, mock, stub, you can kind of do all the things with the different route requesters within the context of a page. But you can also like block images or block CSS, or you can just do a lot of really cool stuff. I'll just say that your mind can go wild with examples. So that's an example of like the VS Code extension, and there's a whole lot of other features that are worth it, but just know it's a very nice experience. It also has UI mode. So let's take a quick look at that. And so to run UI mode, I'm going to pull up a terminal. I'm going to run npx playwright test. I'm going to pass in a UI parameter. And this was the new feature that was released about I guess last month. So you can see it's kind of like the Playwright test runner, except it's kind of built into this Playwright test browser. But similar to some of the other things you can do, if we want to go run our login spec that we've been looking at, I can run that from here. I can watch that. I can kind of step through. I can see everything loading. I have access to all the different network requests, which is really nice down here as well. So that I think you saw the network request that was aborted right there. So this is the one where our Google ads said, hey, don't load that thing, abort that thing. But it's just really powerful because now I've got observability into my test automation, so I can quickly go debug it and get quick feedback and write tests against that. So this is still pretty new to me. There's also like a light and a dark mode if you're not a fan of the dark mode. So it makes me happy. There's also great developer docs. So if you've gone to playwright.dev, you can see there's a really good quick started guide. Everything you need is there. And if it's not there, there's a Discord community that can help answer questions. The final thing, and this is really the reason I think I picked Playwright at the new place I was at, is I know I wanted to write UI tests, also wanted to write API tests, and just the ability to run all my UI and API tests within the same framework. I mean, it was beautiful. It's something that I really am thankful for. So I'm going to click through here. Let's go find an API test. So this is an API. I'm actually going to use a delete login. I'm just going to go run this. Now, this is API, so you're not going to see anything like pretty here, but you can go see like what network request did we actually make. I made a delete with a request body. That's not a really pretty request body. And it looks like this is actually something that is expected to fail, it looks like. But let's just go look at like the code of what that would look like. So let's go to delete user account. So this is an example of an API check. So this test describe is kind of like the highest level organization category. I'm setting up a bunch of different variables that are needed to actually go make a request. So I create a body form. So this is just a JavaScript object here. And before all, so you've got different runner things. So this is going to run something before all. I could also run something before each or after all. But before all, I'm going to make a post request to the create account. I'm going to pass in the form that I have up here. And I'm going to just make sure I'm going to do an expectation in my before all. So this is like not probably the best practice because I'm not testing this before all. But I do want to make sure that I actually have a user and validate I have a user before I go to the actual test I'm going to run. So it is nice to be able to write expects or expectations anywhere. And if something were to fail up here, it would fail. You can see like this status and response code is like goofy. That is not me. That's just the way the system was built. So I'll call that out. And then this is actually where the test starts. So you can see kind of the play button is shown over here, where this describe will run all the different tests within that block. And this is specifically from an API challenge. So you can go click here and read through it for yourself if you'd like, through this website. And then, so all I'm doing here is I'm importing requests. So this is similar to Page or Browser for the Selenium. Request is to be able to make network requests through Playwright. So I import that. I make a delete call. So we're making, the delete call against this delete account. I pass in my headers. I pass in my body, specifically this API request it to be passed as a form, not as a, JSON data body, or not as a data body, but a form body. And I pass that in and I basically validate that the account got deleted. And I do some JSON schema validation. That's for another talk. And I then go do a double check and make sure, hey, did that user actually get deleted? Okay, so I try to log in again and I say, hey, it's 404, the user's not found, the test should pass, everything's good. So API testing, UI testing is beautiful. This is the way it makes me feel. Oh yeah. So we looked at a UI test, we looked at an API test. We didn't get to the register UI test, but that's out there in the repo. One thing that Playwright, and really if you're just working with any kind of automation, it is important that you want to start your test as close to the finish line as possible. So if you need a user created, or if you need a user created, you don't want to build your test to say, before all, let me go click through the UI and do all these things. Ideally, if you can make an API request, hey, create me a user, give it back to me, and then start your test and start as close to the finish line as possible for your assertions and whatnot. It's just automation pro tip there that will save you time. And if you have tools like a data factory or page objects is a good example, right? Create those helper functions you need, things that are like create a user, delete a user, create those in their own files and call them when you need them. So you saw in the delete where I had like a whole bunch of very verbose code. I could have easily abstracted a lot of that out into helper functions that says, go create this user. One line of code, it goes and does all the other stuff, expects things are there that should be, and then do my delete. And then I could have another function that says, hey, go try to log in and expect it to fail and have the right expectations around that. So when you think about cooking, you see the cooking shows, everything's all ready. You want your automation to be like that. You want to be able to grab, a little bit of create a user, a little bit of like delete a user, and, to help your automation, just be more maintainable and easier to use, more dry. All right, so a couple of best practices, or I call them great practices because, best is relative. Write independent automated tests, right? You should never have test 1 rely on test 2 or test 2 rely on test 1. Or if data in test 1 gets modified in a way that affects test 2, that's a bad practice. I experienced that yesterday where it kind of bit me. If you remove as many of those dependencies as possible, don't share data between tests. What's nice is like Playwright helps you do some of that, but you still have to make a conscious effort to, not organize your test that way. So what that means is you may want to set up data, hopefully via API calls, if you have access to that. If you have access to a database, any of these Playwright libraries with test runners, you can hook up a database to it pretty easily. It's just a matter of like using whatever library that you want to bring in to connect to the database. Playwright doesn't do that out of the box, but it's a coding language that you would find the right library to do that. So similar to Selenium. Utilize static data when absolutely necessary. So there may be some things that are like, this doesn't change or it's not going to change. Make a decision. Hey, I'm going to treat this as static data. It's never going to change. If it does change, my tests are going to fail. And do that when you need to. Like I do that for certain tests, but I would say 80% of our tests don't rely on any kind of static data. But there are certain things that do, because it's too expensive to create from scratch every single time. But make decisions and challenge those decisions, as you're building out your framework. Leave the state in the same way you found it or better. So in my Selenium days, you open up a browser and you go do some things. And if you didn't have like the close the browser set up correct in your test runner, like that browser just stays open and it goes to the next thing and it goes to the next thing. That caused me some headache. What's nice with Playwright is at the end of every test or describe block, like I guess at the end of every test, it's getting a new browser context, a new page context with fresh cookies and all that stuff, which can be a really good thing. But if you rely on like shared state or some kind of logged in state, there are ways to manage that through Playwright, which is pretty nice as well. Create reusable methods and functions, using a page object model or something similar where a lot of the logic is abstracted outside of the test, can be really useful. And also just say if number 1 is true, if you're writing independent tests, you should be able to run all your tests in parallel, which is going to make your test smoking fast. And just a reminder, the goal of your suite, or the goal of my suite, right, is to catch regressions, right? It's that change detection. Has anything changed that's, I'm going to go find those things, explore those things, dig into them, and make the call. Was this on purpose? Was it not on purpose? And the end goal being, I want to release high quality software to our customers. So just a quick plug to me. I've been writing at playwrightsolutions.com for 8 months or so. Lots of really good tutorials if you're interested in Playwright or you run into an issue. I pretty much write all the issues I face, but I'm currently walking through how do you write API tests in Playwright and just kind of focusing on not just a breadth, like here's how to make a GET call, but I want to go deeper on, hey, how do you make a GET call where you have all this complex data, but still keep it simple enough where it can fit on like 2,000 words or whatever. So check that out if you're interested, and you can connect with me. And any questions?
Sure, Butch. I think there's a bunch of questions out there. I think great presentation. Thank you so much. I think I really love the way that you started saying you can't automate away exploratory testing, but you can automate boring checks to all the pro tips and great practices. Thank you so much. I believe the audience has felt interesting too. I'm going to pick up a few questions quickly. We've got more than like 5 minutes, and we'll try to answer most of them. All right, first up is, what's your opinion on using the Playwright's test runner versus using runners like Cucumber to run Playwright using SpecFlow?
Yeah, so I'll say, like, I've used Cucumber back in Ruby. So like I know Cucumber from those days. I would say with the Playwright runner, right, you're going to get reporting, videos, trace files. You'll get trace files when you run certain tests, I believe, but all that stuff kind of comes out of the box in a nice, pretty report that you can have at the end of your checks. And you can also build out custom reporters as well. So if you want to report to Allure, you can do that all through the Playwright test runner. When you start introducing other runners, right, you're looking at gluing other tools together. And I was trying to avoid that. So I know there's a lot of value in, an organization that's bought into BDD, where the product team's bought in, the devs are bought in, the testers are bought in. Like, if you have that, like, yeah, I mean, go implement it with Playwright. You can. It's really just like, our org is not like that. Like, the devs do their thing, we do testing, we give them feedback, and we try to help them release high quality stuff. But we're using it for change detection rather than like, this is how this test should behave, and we haven't even written any code yet, and we're writing user story. We're lagging at this point. So, that's just where we are.
All right. There's always a question of what BDD is and are you really practicing BDD? But I know that's a discussion for a different day and different topic. Thanks for answering that, Butch. Next question is from Sparsh. How does Playwright handle transfer of data or state between browser contexts, particularly when it comes to testing interconnected user scenarios or workflows?
Yeah, so there is an idea of session state or session storage state, which would say things like, I can't remember if it's your session state or your local storage, but there's a way to get like your cookies basically out of whatever and brought over to here. When it comes to like dealing with complex user scenarios, typically what I've found is I want two types of tests, right? I want let me go click on the page and make sure the things are working type tests, like the test case type things. And then I want scenarios, right? So for scenarios, those tests for me look a lot different than go log in and validate the login worked, right? A scenario is going to be, all right, go log in, go create this user, take this user down this journey of different things. And Playwright does have the concept of a test.step within the context of a test that helps you break down, hey, the user does this, do these test steps. The user does this, do these test steps. And, if you have like a very, 2-minute long user journey, there are even things that you can do within those where you say, hey, if this fails, I want to soft fail it. So it's going to say the test failed at the end, but I'm going to keep running the rest of the assertions. So there's useful things like that in those user journeys, but a lot of it is really the same way you do it in Selenium or Cypress, right? You've got to architect and think through how do I want to manage this and maintain it and build it in a sustainable way. And yeah, that's my answer.
Got it. All right. Yeah, I think there's a few more from Ankur. Are the mocking libraries like Noka and Sinon compatible with Playwright's API testing too? I have been using them for API testing with Mocha now.
I have no idea. But my guess is if it's a JavaScript library, it can probably be used to some capacity. In the end, right, it's just a node application running within a test context, and Playwright's going to give you the request functions where you can make a request and then make assertions on those requests and responses. But I haven't used that. I mean, so this is specifically for mocking. So yeah, I would say for my mocking, most of those have been for the UI, I will get, here's 100 responses. I will take those 100 and say, give me the top 3. And I want to mock those top 3 so I don't have to make 100 more API requests. So that's typically how I've used a lot of mocking, is mocking with almost real data. But on the specifically API tests, we have an open API spec file. There's no hard integration with Playwright to say, hey, go grab this spec file, go create a bunch of tests. But we've built tools that say, go get me all the different methods and go grep our repo and get all the different methods and see where we're missing coverage, or even validate, like, are all the right response objects called back that, exist in this open API spec file. But those are all things like we built internally. Those are not things that are like libraries yet. Yeah, maybe we'll post those out there one day.
Got it. Thank you. There's a question from Vasily Platonov. Thanks for the presentation. What is your impression about component testing with Playwright?
Never tried it. So I don't know. Like, I mean, I'm a tester at heart. I like to learn things and test things as a user. So getting into the component side of things, like, I would say a lot of the Playwright ambassadors are definitely more like they're developers that work in the JavaScript area, and they would be much better at answering that than I would. So,
all right.
Sorry.
I think let's move away from the technical parts of it. And since you touched upon Playwright ambassador, but you're a Playwright ambassador yourself, right? So, what is it to be a Playwright ambassador? And what if someone want to become an ambassador?
Yeah. So, I mean, the program is pretty small, and I think, if you're interested, right, reach out to the Playwright team. Debbie is kind of the person who's running things. And I mean, for me, like, I was invited to come be ambassador, I think a lot because of what I've tried to do in the community. I've tried to answer a lot of questions and just put out a lot of content and just, be active part of the community. Given a couple talks similar to this, but in the end, right, I mean, I love Playwright. That being a Playwright ambassador doesn't mean like I hate Selenium or Cypress. Like, I love those tools. Like, a tool is a tool in my tool belt that I can get things done with. But I do love sharing, all the different experiences I've had with Playwright. And yeah, I mean, I'm happy to kind of wear the logo or whatever. But I mean, I've got a Cypress sticker too. So I mean, it's all good.
Awesome. Yeah, I think we will ship some lambdatest stickers and Selenium stickers as well.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Butch. I think we're already 2 minutes over the clock, and great presentation. Thank you so much. I think I've personally learned a few things. I've been meaning to try Playwright for a long time, but I've got a sneak peek of what it does, and hopefully people who are already practicing Playwright would also got some more insights about it. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. You all have been consistently there with great questions and making the chat interactive. Until I see you next time in the next month of Voices of Community Edition. Until then, take care and bye.